So thank you all for coming. I don't know how many of you know Patrick, but Patrick actually lives in Jaipur and he has studied Indian art, culture and textiles, and he's written professionally since 1993, and he consults with many national and community organizations, museums and private textile collectors as well. One of his most renowned books is Quilts of India, Timeless Textiles, which is actually sitting under his laptop at the moment. He's also written a publication called Quilt Story, the Cultural Heritage Field Guide of India, Bangladesh and Pakistan. And he's also featured author in masterpieces at the Jaipur Court, Quilting Art Magazine, Art Quilt Quarterly, and Quilters newsletters. So, Patrick, thanks so much for being here. And this talk is actually part of a program that we did in the past 3 months. I don't know if you all have had the opportunity to come to Nila, but we actually opened an exhibition called the Corona Quilt Project 3 months ago, where we stitched together panels of works done by artisans, students, and practitioners into a quilt, and it was displayed for 3 months as a solidarity of time and all the hardships that happened during COVID. It was just an honoring to practitioners, artisans, craftspeople. Of course, that quilt has come down now because of the rains. We didn't want to sort of destroy it completely. But this talk is actually part of that program. So I have some questions with me, which I've written down. Let's start by what I've read some of your books, and in one particular series you wrote, one quilt style can have many different names, and many different quilts can have the same name. Could you sort of explain that?
Thank you. Welcome. Nice to see you all here. Until recently, I discovered 90 different names for quilts in India. And more recently, when I was working on this, I found half again as many more. It wasn't until just recently that the International Quilt Festival that was held in Chennai for twice now, and another one coming up maybe, that the word quilt is actually being used in common conversation. Because, for example, Sujani has 5 different types of quilts. We'll get into that in a moment. But the languages in India, there are 22 major languages and 13 different scripts and over 720 dialects. So that tells us why there's so many different names for quilts. Oftentimes, the name of a quilt will identify it, but as you will see this evening, Sujani is used for 5 different types of quilts.
Okay. And what does this mean for the Sujani?
Okay. So these are the 5 different types. Okay.
Should we just also start by just saying what is a Sujani? Or do you want to come to that later?
No, we can address that now. So the word Sujani, there are so many different variations and corruptions of the word, but the 2 that are most common are Su, which means good, and Jana, which means birth. So it means good birth. Another common way of defining the word is that it's a small coverlet or a needle. Sojni, it's an Urdu word. So, but regardless of how we spell it or what it is, most of the time it refers to a quilt.
Okay, yeah. Thank you. So going back to what, the types of Sujani that you're going to talk about.
So there are basically 5 different types that I've discovered so far. There's the pre-revival Sujani from Bihar, then the post-revival, once the intervention happened, and at that time the Sujani changed. So I define those as 2 different genres. And then the white and white Sujanese from across the subcontinent, which we'll explain. There's the Baruch Sujani, which is from Baruch, Gujarat, and then the Sujani Kanta. So those are the 5 different types of Sujanis that we have so far.
A lot of Sujanis. Would you like to maybe elaborate on each one?
Yeah, let's do that.
Yeah.
One thing I do want to mention though, only the Baruch Sujani is indicative of the geography. It's only found in Baruch. But Sujanis in all the other 4 styles can come from many different places. And so, for example, Jharkhand was made out of different states. It was made out of West Bengal, and pieces of Orissa, and various and sundry other states. But the culture is the same. So you will find that these pieces, these quilts from that region go across political boundaries. So that's how I define them. Okay.
Yeah. Are you going to talk about the various kinds of Sujanis?
Yeah. Let's. Why don't we start with the
pre-revival Sujani? I think that's the first one.
Yeah. So this is the first that you see here. The mother or the baby of tatters. It's a whole concept of quilting that I have seen across the subcontinent, which means people taking various and sundry different pieces that are either going to be discarded or thrown away or used as a gamsha, and putting them together to create something that's a new whole. And that's really, this unified whole goes across religion and across cultures throughout India. The second goal in the pre-revival Sujani was to, and Sujana, your baby quilt, if you will, were used to wrap the babies because they would take the mother's sari or father's dhoti and make a new, refashion it into a new quilt. So, from this basic thing, the basic quilt, which I call a utility quilt, is just the running stitch done in broad stitches with layered old sari or old dhoti. The Kanta and the Kantas from West Bengal are undivided Bengal, let's say, which would include Bangladesh and West Bengal. They're very similar, but they have very distinct genres. Here you can see pre-revival Sujani. It evolved from the arpana, or the drawings that the women did on the ground, and also the ones that they did on the wall. We see a lot of it still, the wall painting done in Jharkhand, in northern Jharkhand. And many of the designs are very similar. It has a very strong naturalistic motifs. Many of the things are drawn from nature, many of the designs, and it's very bold and almost, as you can see, almost stark compared to the post-revival Sujani. So this is another example. This is a wall painting, and if you look at the elephant, you can see the similarity between the elephant on the wall painting and the one on the Sujani. This is another one. Sorry, it's sideways. But again, we have a tree of life, and which is a very common motif we see here also. Here's a better idea of that elephant that we saw. So these are actually pre-revival The colors were muted, they were very calm and tame. But then we get into the post-revival Sujani. When Viji Srinivasan went to Bihar, she saw the women doing these stitches, and she said, I don't want these women just cranking out napkins and pillow covers. She encouraged them to tell their story. And so at that point, there was a shift, and we ended up with many of the same motifs being carried over from the past, but also a distinct difference between what that looks like and what that looks like. We get much more color happening. And so she had the gifted embroiderers in the area and artisans collaborate, and the reason it was successful is because she brought the community into the intervention. The intervention was successful for that reason because she involved the women. The new topics created a bit of controversy. They had a lot of different things. Is this the one? On the Sujanis, you're going to notice this is women's work. Do you see any men here? Not very many. And they've been called out on it. But you can see here, this is all the different types of work that a woman does, right? And so she's carrying wood, she's making chapatis, she's carrying mangoes, she's bringing the water, she's feeding the cows. So it shows the extent. This is a calmed down version of some of the more controversial issues. So as things evolve, then we have a distinct change happening. These women in Bihar were, how do I put it nicely, were abused. I mean, I think most people are aware of. And so this was a way for them to begin to build and self-empower. They could tell their stories, but then they balanced it out. Now you can see from this one, before we move on, very different than the ones we're seeing here. This is one woman's work, and it doesn't look like what we've just seen, so it's evolving. And a new genre has emerged over the past. It looks like she's drawing an arpana on the ground, doing what's that stick name called? Yeah. And then a couple of fashion models, I think. So they've been able to create a thriving market. They tell their stories, but then balance it out also with things that are more marketable. That's the Bihar Sujani post and past.
The third Sujani that we were talking about is the white on white, which is made of different parts, which is made in different parts of the subcontinent.
Yeah.
But it basically, we look at it as white on white, but there's also color in it.
Yeah.
So can you sort of explain that?
I was thinking about this earlier, and I call them the white on white Sujani. I mean, because this is the back.
Oh, this is the back.
And the red is the front. They're not all white on white. In fact, this is a detail of one that is in the city palace. A lot of times they used either color in North Bangladesh, where this comes from, or throughout the subcontinent, they would use indigo dyed cotton and put it behind in channels that they stitched shut to give this kind of contrast. Perhaps a more appropriate name for this genre might be Mughal influence, because that's the key. The design is all comes from the Mughal sophisticated design sensibility. This is, can you see this okay? Yeah. So this is indigo in the cotton that's been put in the back. And you can see the various motifs. So color does enter into it. A lot of the designs are, again, naturalistic. Here we have jolly and flowers. And a lot of them will have fish scale motif. If you can see this here.
Yeah, the fish scale.
Very common for defining space, uses a background. Laharia, the waves, or your zigzag. And so, this is another version. This is the full quilt from City Palace, the Sujani. And I was able to see the back of it and to see how dark that indigo is. Like your shirt, you know, it's that dark, but it creates a shadow. And this has been done for a long time. In the 1909 exhibition in Delhi, they commented on this work being done in places like Maharashtra, and not just in Jaipur. So we end up seeing more advanced designs. Most of these are not figurative, which means most of them do not have people in them. Most of them are designs, although, as we see here, we have a couple of birds, we have a signature underneath, and the next one, there is a man, if you can see him, he's holding back this dog or lion or whatever, and then, so very seldom do we get figures coming in. Most of it is pattern. So, in the end, what we have is that we have a lot of really large ones, like this one in City Palace, because they were only used on special occasions. And this cotton that they maul very thin, so that it could be this very densely stitched. Afterwards, come up and look at this, how small these stitches are. So, but they'd only bring them out on special occasions, roll them out, have their party, roll them back up, so they weren't used like the smaller ones. They get damaged.
So
in the beginning, you'd also talked about a Bharuch quilt, which we actually have one of.
This is her baby quilt.
Yeah, this is my baby quilt, by the way. This was found in a trunk in my home, and I found out later it's a Bharuch quilt, and I was told by my parents that I actually used this. So this is called a Sujani, but it's made on a loom.
Right. So in my field work, when I was in the village or talking to people, I would use the word they used. They called this a quilt, I call it a quilt. Because, and also curators, and some of them have been calling it a quilt. People sometimes argue with me and say that's not a quilt. So I assume it's a quilt because they tell me it is. I can't go against the culture that way. It's a double weave, and you can see the pockets. This is an older one. See how we have the tan on this side, and then the red on this side. And so this is a man actually doing it. Two people sit at the loom, and when they get to a certain point, like they get to here, they close the pocket and then start a new pocket. And once it's almost finished, they fill it again with cotton. And that's it. It gives great insulation property. Unfortunately, this Baruch Sujani has seen better days and has seen some sad days. They were sidestepped by people. One university said, oh, we're going to help you. They fell out. They had a woman come in and said, oh, I'm going to promote you. She stole their idea. So the few people that are left that are doing this. It's like only 4 or 5 families involved in the craft now. The one man that I spoke to had been doing this for 30 years. Unfortunately, some of the masters have died from doing quilts of India. My friends went to visit him and he was no longer. So we can see that it's on what I call holding on by a thread. It's one of those crafts, textile crafts, that may continue or may not. But on the upside, people like Nick Taylor from the Serve Happiness Foundation is encouraging them, helping to promote them. This is like Anuradha's piece here. And here I am in the shop, and what they do is they sell other things besides this quilt. They have to make ends meet. So he sells under the brand of Sujani Craft. And he was exporting these to a man in California who was very innovative with it. And I've seen the diagrams that this man sent. He was doing them for wall covering, floor covering, cushion covers, seat covers, curtains, because of the insulation quality of it. Here's another shot of them at a fair, and they're beautiful, beautifully done. The origins come from a quilt called Lashinfi from Northeast India. And this is a similar type of technique, although it has been adapted to the Sujani. The Mitai women of Manipur make this quilt. And every woman comes into a marriage, she has to know how to do this. It's, they use it on the fly shuttle loom. And so I've seen one in the Powerhouse Museum in Australia, which is very similar to this. This was, as you can see here, you see these are bigger squares. These are the small, this was the original. And I kind of think that this may have faded a little.
Yeah, I'm sure.
Because the coffee color and the tan were what were predominant at that time. And again, the Lashinfi isn't strictly a quilt, but they call it a quilt. It keeps you warm in the evening. And again, they use it for multiple purposes. So,
the Sujani Kantha is the last Sujani on the list. And Sujani and Kantha sort of quilting style seemed to me very distinct. And yet, in this case, the two names are sort of combined. Can you explain that?
There are a number of different types of kantas. And it's usually the Sujani kanta is similar to this. It's a rectangular, it's used as a blanket, it has a functional use, but also it has a religious use sometimes, and they offer it to guests as an honored place to sit. They are often confused with the LEP kanta, which is not as elaborate, and it's much more practical, and generally a lot thicker quilt. Really used to keep warm. When I was doing this book, I came up with a classification system of the 5 different types of kantas. I'd like to share that with you. Mostly in the past, people have done, okay, this kanta is from Rajshahi. This is from, Dhaka. This one is from Calcutta. This one is from Sri Lanka. So they would come from saying where it was from or how it was used as far as to classify. But if you just take a quilt, okay, let's just take this one and say, okay, without knowing anything, can I look at this and classify it? And so that's what I did, and I came up with 5 different classifications. And the first one is the utility kanta. which I mentioned earlier. Very simple, running stitch, nothing fancy, used to keep warm. The next one is the narrative content. These are more elaborate, and when narrative usually implies a story from the beginning, middle, and end. But for example, this isn't a full story. We're getting, if you will, a selfie of the woman, right, in this type of a concept. And she will put pieces of things that she hopes for. She will put pieces of her life. For example, you can see on this one, we have an airplane and a train, which is very common in contests that are that old. When the airplane first came to India, oh, wow, airplane, I'll put that on my concept. Or we can travel by train. And some even have bicycles on them. And so they put pieces of their life on the narrative content. They also tell stories. Radha and Krishna is a very common one. And so here's another one. The next one is a geometric content. Again, if you don't know where it's from, but you can say, okay, in the classification, this is geometric. It's usually made with triangles, squares, diagonals, and so it stands apart from the other contents, and you can tell just by looking at it that it's that. The next one we have is the floral content, which is many times the Muslim women don't put pictorial things on, so they are the ones who often will do the floral or the geometric or the geofloral. So these are two floral designs. The final one is geofloral, because it's neither geometric or floral. It encompasses both pieces, as you can see here and here. So these are flowers, which are floral, within the grid. And then, so that's why I came up with geofloral.
And these are your classifications.
These are my classifications. I'll stand by them.
And the logic behind them.
Yeah.
Of all of these classifications.
So, in closing, I just want to reiterate, we've looked at the 5 different types of Sujanis. Pre-revival, post-revival, the Baruch Sujani, the white on white, the Sujani Kanta. So, if you have any questions, I'd be more than happy to. Do you have any?
Yeah, well, I thank you very much for sort of explaining to us about the various Sujanis, and there's so much more in your books that you've written. But I actually wanted to ask you this at the beginning of the talk, but now that we know of not only what these Sujanis are and what they mean not only to the communities but to you as well, I actually want to go right back to the beginning and what actually got you interested in all of this. And you stay in India, and what brought you here, and what made you stay here?
When I was about 7 years old, we went to my grandmother's house in Iowa, which is in the middle of America. And at that time, I was to go to bed at 6 o'clock, whether the sun was out or not. So I was sent upstairs to the attic, and I went up, and there was still light pouring in the window. And I sat there looking at this textile on my bed, having no idea what it was. It was a crazy quilt. And that was the first quilt that I ever saw. And then I had an affinity for textiles ever since, really. And then when I first came to India, I think I bought, the first textile I ever bought was a bed sheet, but it was actually indigo. I didn't even know what indigo was then. And so, India is so rich in its textile tradition. that is endless as to what we can learn and find out. Yeah.
Thank you. Anybody has some questions for Patrick? I think it's really fascinating that you've traveled across India trying to find various textiles, and of course, I think that experience of you in the attic with that first textiles that you actually resonated with probably at that time has made you write about the quilt and about embroidery from various parts of the country.
I would like to go back to something I said earlier. I was brought up in a very religious household and have remained religious, although it has changed somewhat over the years of what religion I believe in. But this concept of taking things that are separate and bringing them together to create something whole is what is really at the heart of my interest in quilts. It's an action, even if the woman isn't totally aware of what she's doing, it creates that energy, if you will, that she brings into a material object and brings unification to something that didn't exist in the past. So we ended up with homes. I mean, we're all striving to become whole.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think even in India, if you take a look at the traditionally, women used to make Sujani, so women used to make quilts for their daughters. And that was also a way of, sending off their daughters, feeling a little bit of sort of cover and a little bit of security. And, it's in many cases, like you see in children, they have a little stuffed toy or something. But, a woman would go into her new home, taking with her something that has been made by her mother or her grandmothers and her aunts, etc. And that sort of brings this beautiful sense of security and wholeness in their next part of their lives. I think that's really important. Thank you so much, Patrick, for being here. Thank you so much for, over the past few months while we've done the exhibition on the Corona Quilt and the project for actually helping us connect with so many artisans and advising us in so many ways. Thank you. Any questions, anybody, before we sort of wrap up? Yeah.
I just want to ask, which one was most challenging, Sujani, for the research? Challenging.
Which one was the most challenging?
Quilt?
Yeah, in terms of research.
Not research or Sujani's.
Challenging in what way? Would you say challenging?
I don't know, to find it.
To find
Maybe you just heard a story and couldn't find it, or there is only one or two left in the whole world.
There are a couple of things that were challenging. One of the things is knowing the right word to ask for. I would go, I remember very well on my way from here to Jaisalmer, and I stopped along the way, knocked on the door, and said, "Do you have any Gudri?" No. Do you have any contests? No. Do you have any resides? Oh yes, we have a whole room full. Okay, so that's knowing what to call a quilt when you're in the community makes a very big difference. And for example, the Resign, Gudri, and Kanta are probably the three most common names for a quilt here in India that people know. And a Gudri can mean so many different kinds of things. And the opposite is true as well. You can have one quilt that's made here, that's made in Maharashtra, that's made in Karnataka. It has the same name, but it's a different quilt altogether in each location. And that becomes a challenge.
And the funniest story that most funniest story.
Yeah.
The funniest.
Most funniest story.
Or second funniest, this was funny.
Let me think a second. Actually, it's not funny, but it was very interesting. When the first time I went to Baruch, right, the Baruch Sujani, I checked into the hotel and was in the lobby, went up to my room, and my bed had a Sujani on it, a maroon Sujani. Every room had. It was like, it was another time I was in Gujarat, in southern Gujarat, and the women there of the Hasidic community, Sidi Bacha, the black people, I went into their village after finding a boy on the road who was hitchhiking, and I said, "Where are you going?" He goes, "To my village." And it was where I wanted to go, so we took him along. I went in there, and you can see in the book, I'll show you the picture. All across the wall, there must have been 20 quilts laid out. I mean, it was like I'd called ahead, you know? It's things like that that made it very magical. Not necessarily funny, but fun.
Yeah.
I have a question to ask. While doing this craft, Sujani, did they have any singing or storytelling or any kind of legends, myths around it while the women sat and did this kind of work?
It's a very good question. Not specifically, but certain communities, the women will sing, and there are songs about Godri, my Godri with the bells, and my husband's taking me away. You know, there are songs that they sing. It just depends on the community. I've seen where women sit together on a veranda, like similar to this, and in the afternoon we'll stitch together and share stories and chat. There's nothing formal, but we do have other, like singing, or mostly gossip.
So have you been able to document any of these songs or anything in your book?
Yeah, I do. In my book, there is mention of one of the songs it's about the Godri with the tassels and bells. It's a song that they sing. Yeah.
And where is that? Which part of the country?
I'm trying to remember. I think that's in Gujarat.
In Gujarat.
Yeah, yeah.
Even in Rajasthan, there are certain areas of Barmer and
Yes.
all where they have a lot of
Yes.
this Sujani work, Have you explored those pieces?
Yeah,
Barmer and Jaisalmer, even in that region, they are doing a lot of Sujani.
yeah. They do a lot of applique and work out that way. There's a number of really big NGOs also working in that area.
For example, how the people behind you, is it one person's job? Because as you mentioned, is it for your daughter farewell, or it's a community's family's work? Because it's pretty big work. How it's usually distributed or how it is done in that sense?
It depends on the community. Sometimes women will do things like this together. However, I think after looking at this for a long time, that one woman did it. Because if you look at the ones where a number of women were working on it, if you look carefully, you can see their signature, if you will. You can see, okay, this woman takes a little longer stitch. This, I think, was done by one woman. And sometimes they're done by one woman, and sometimes they're done by generations. A grandmother will start one, give it to her daughter, she will give it to her daughter, and I've seen ones like that, and you can tell the difference between each hand that has touched it. Yeah. Hello. Good.
So I have one question. Majority of these quilts, buddies that you see in India. So originally, like if you go back, they were always made from upcycled fabrics that were the family or used. If you compare it to the quilts around the world, the Indian quilts, so it was also like in the other part of the world upcycling and then making into quilts, or it was mostly fresh fabric.
So, can I have your name?
Santosh.
Santosh. So Santosh is asking that in India, most of the quilts were like upcycled fabric made out of old clothes or women's sarees, etc. Did you feel the same thing about other parts of the world? that quilts were made in the same fashion? Not now, but many years ago?
I would say both. Initially, it was a poor, would be a poor man's robe, right? Throughout the world now, and even in India now, the people are still upcycling cloth. So that still happens, and they're also using new cloth here. A lot of the NGOs, when they're producing for the market, they use fresh cloth. Sometimes the inside may be older, but at least the top and the bottom. And so globally, I think we still see both happening. You know, there's always going to be fabric remnants from a tailor or from a sewing project that gets used in a particular quilt.
And traditionally, what do you think we stand with the sea, like in Europe or?
Traditionally, I would say they were mostly upcycled. If I'm thinking of America and the fabrics that they would cut out of actually cloth made here in India, Tree of Life or Kalamkari, they would cut out and make a new quilt with it.
Can you share what's the today's scenario of this craft?
What is the?
Today's scenario, like present is
For this craft, for Sujani, or what do you think is the present day scenario for crafts is what he asked. But, or of Sujani, or any experience that you had that has made you think about the present day scenario of the craft sector?
Well, within the, as you may or may not know, the textile sector is the second largest sector in India after agriculture. It's an unorganized sector, and unfortunately, some crafts are getting lost. Whether or not the Sujani survives, I don't know. We hope that they will. But a lot of the techniques get passed on, even though they're not directly related. Because it's unorganized, it's difficult to show the impact. A woman will go and work in the field during the harvest and then come home and make quilts. I mean, that's a reality.
I think if you've seen any, if you've had any experiences to understand, you know.
I guess the most predominant one is the Guru Sujani, where it's really teetering between being survival and making it into a next generation or not.
I'd like to add to that. I think crafts has been, crafts, textiles has been more a utility item in our country, and there's been so much of it. And a lot of it has now become a commodity. I think the gap that there is between design and how we utilize these products, and of course the constant influx of sort of modern day things. I think in our country it's very important for at least the next generation to understand what the importance of our heritage, our culture, and the craft, which is part of our heritage and culture, and actually use it on an everyday basis, because these are everyday items that were used, and they're everyday items. So if you sort of honor where you come from, and you honor what was made there, and you honor who made it, and you honor what was made by the hand, I think these are things which within you, if you do that, they sort of sustain. Otherwise, they dwindle and it's sort of over. So I think that's what's really important, and it's very important for the next generation to understand that, because this new generation is a very use and throw generation. Too much consumption, too much wastage. And I think that's what we really all need to think about and teach our kids and teach the younger lot.
Most of the crafts in India, they involve the entire family. So, and we see that with the increasing advancements and technology coming in, so crafts get affected by whatever it is surrounded by. So, I have noticed that I work with pattu weaving, and that craft was a really family-intensive craft, and now it has been affected because the old people used to do the spinning, and they're not doing it anymore. So, there's no handspun yarn. So with Sujani, it is more of a craft which is associated with the women. So how is the change in today's lifestyle, like the lifestyle change which has come for the women, and also with how now we also have machines to make the same thing. So how is that affecting the craft? Like, are they able to still give it as much time? Has it become less important to them, or like we have seen visual changes in it, but if we talk about the rate at which they were making or the time that they were devoting to it, like how has that changed?
Well, at least in Bihar, I've met a number of these women and had conversations with them, and they're dedicated. And they're dedicated not only because they're making a good livelihood, right? It's very empowering. And I read an article about a young college woman who was working there, totally enthralled with it, changed her, her degree program to focus on the sushi. So I think that there is an impetus to continue. And when we see things as beautiful as this, and the ladies that were just here last week, that were making these, it's carrying forth a heritage. And the two women that were here, they weren't that old.
No.
They were young, and they were very, very much dedicated to doing this. So it was very encouraging when I met them. Can you just tell a little bit more about them?
Yeah, I mean, I think traditionally, like I said just now, I think traditionally Sujani was done, like you said, in the homes, and it was sort of a community sort of space. It was something that you sort of gave to your daughter or as a gift, and then further it was used within the community. I think today it's become larger. Women are actually getting empowered. There's engagement, and it's a skill which is used for any generation, which also gives empowerment to the women. The women could also be doing farming, and they could also be doing housework. But at the end of the day, they spend a few hours a day doing this within their own homes, the security of their own homes, within the security of other women in the community, and that gives them not only enough money or more money for their own homes, but also it empowers the entire ecosystem around them. And I think that's what the change is.
A lot of times these women are bringing in the major amount of money into the home when they're doing this work.
I think that becomes a major factor because mostly people don't, like the younger generation, they don't want to pursue it because there's no income generation. So there's very little motivation for them to pursue. But that is not happening here.
No, it's not, because I think for women who are even growing up, for girls who are growing up in the same home, they see that their mothers are able to sort of, take out time for their housework, as well as do this for a few hours in the evening. Or, like you said, that they sit together and they gossip, and yet they're doing something like this. So it's actually quite an amazing space when you see these women sitting together. Like you said, we had two women here from Bihar, and very young. They came, they traveled, and that's the first question you ask. Will they travel? Will they come out of their homes? I think maybe 15 years ago, I worked in crafts for over 20, 25 years, and in the beginning, women would not even step out of their house and say, what would you like? And now they're not only traveling across cities, states, but also across the globe. So that's really empowerment, and it comes from traditional skill, which is inherent to their culture and tradition.
I would underscore that. I mean, I've read so many stories and talked to so many women who would never have left their home. They wouldn't even open the door to go outside.
Exactly.
And now they're traveling to Patna, they're coming to Jaipur, they're going to Delhi. And I was working with people in Jharkhand. They were invited to Italy
I've seen so
for
many.
their quilts.
Yes.
How does a piece start? Are there any tools that they use to kind of draw it out to get these perfect circles? Like, how does the piece start? Like, what is the first stitch that goes into it?
It depends on the genre. Different quilts get started in different ways. If you're working, and different women in different genres work in different methods. Some will work from the outside to the center. Some will begin in the center and work their way out. So mostly they have some type of a base cloth that they work from. I'm thinking right now of the Kodi from Karnataka, where they have a large piece of cloth, and then they begin from the outside to work themselves into the center, at the same time sewing them together and embroidering, working to the middle. Kanjas are generally have a base cloth of 2 or 3 dhotis or saris as their base, usually white. We do have fine color, different colored ones, but predominantly white. And then they will begin with the mandala in the middle most of the time. Let me think of another one. Well, the brood Sujani, they begin with one by one,
Yeah, I think it depends. I think,
It's a lot of different ways, that they begin the construction. Both. Sometimes they just okay, here's my things, I'm going to pick them up as I touch them, or other women will plan. Also, some of these, when you have a woman who is good at storytelling and a woman who's good at embroidery, the two may work together. So the woman may draw with chalk or some fugitive material, and then the woman who's good at embroidery will stitch it. So you have collaborations like that also.
Yeah.
I understand this industry is very unorganized and this craft in general, but has there been any way of like a connection between the main market and the craft sector? So there is actually utilization of this craft in real homes for people can actually buy it.
Yeah, I mean, I think there are various organizations who are sort of exhibiting. One name would be Dastakar, the Dastakari Haat Samiti. The government has come up with many emporiums, etc. So it's actually, I think, it's sort of out there. Like I said, it's been there in the 1970s. Actually, is when the government started a lot of these emporiums and brought craft into the marketplace as a product of utility or commodity. That was also the time when designers came from overseas and collaborated with many artisans, via the government of India as well as institutions such as NID, etc. So I think craft was sort of come to the forefront in the marketplace in the 1970s, probably in the mid 70s. Of course, from then to now, things have changed in terms of the world and what other countries bring to us. So, like I said, I think the gap a lot of times is design. The skill remains the same. We don't have an exhibition downstairs of heritage textiles, which we did a couple of months ago. But if you see, the skill is the same. It's the design which needs to change to move with the market. And I think once you do that, it becomes really easy to sort of make crafts a part of your life. I just had a young lady who ran inside and bought a little gift from our shop, and she said, "I need to buy a birthday present for my daughter's, friend whose birthday there is." And I found it really sweet that she wanted to come and buy something that was made by hand, that was craft. So I think these are just small ways of bringing crafts into our lives. Yeah, and it's there. Everything is there. And I think COVID has also made a lot of us think about that. COVID has made a lot of us think about how much we use, and we really don't need to use so much, and how the use of local products is what we need to go back to rather than buying things from across the globe, etc. So I think that those are all changes which are coming in everyone's minds.
Last time I had met those two girls from Patna.
Oh, you did?
And yeah, they gave me this gift.
How lovely.
But unfortunately I lost my glasses. I was traveling. So from tomorrow I'll start getting this filling.
I'm so glad. I'm so glad. That's lovely. Really nice. It's actually therapeutic. I
Now have made me think.
Yeah.
What color?
Yeah.
Should I use? I'm trying to stay on yellow ochre
Yeah.
and some green, and let me see how I work.
Very nice. Thank you. Should we wrap up?
Ah.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Patrick.
Oh, thank you.
We have something for you from Nila. And thank you, all of you, for coming. It's really been nice. It's so nice to see all of you here. And then we have some tea out in the front. What do we have with tea? Oh, it's always. Oh, yeah. And thank you for organizing.
So this is a Nila bracelet.
Oh, wow.
Can I put that on you? It's like a charm.
Oh, yeah.
Charm. Okay.
I like all the term I can get.
Hey, that's for you. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.